You're 60 years old. It's 30,000 BC. You have no teeth left. Your joints ache constantly. You can't run. You can barely walk some mornings. By every modern assumption about prehistoric life, you should already be dead, or abandoned, or at absolute best, quietly tolerated until nature finishes the job. Except none of that happened, because someone fed you, every single day, for years. And the fact that this happened, that it's written into the bones we've dug up, might be one of the most quietly radical discoveries in all of human prehistory. Because it means something that completely contradicts the story most of us were taught about how ancient life worked. Let's go. First, let's deal with the number everyone thinks they know. Life expectancy in ancient times was 30. You've heard this. It gets repeated constantly, usually as a way of saying ancient people died young and old age basically didn't exist. Here's the problem. That number is an average. And averages lie when the data is lopsided. Ancient infant and child mortality was brutal. A huge percentage of people died before age 5. That single fact drags the average life expectancy down to somewhere around 30, even if plenty of people lived into their 60s and 70s. It's the same statistical trick as saying the average net worth of a room includes one billionaire. The number tells you almost nothing about the typical person. What researchers actually look at is something called conditional life expectancy. If you survived childhood, how long could you expect to live? And the answer, across multiple hunter-gatherer populations studied by anthropologists, is startling. If you made it to 15, you had a very real shot at 60, 70, even 80. Old age wasn't rare in prehistory. It was normal. For anyone who got past the dangerous early years, getting old was simply what happened next. So the real question isn't, did old people exist? They did. Constantly. The real question is what happened to them once they got there. Let's start with one of the most famous skeletons in all of paleoanthropology. Shanidar 1. Found in Shanidar Cave in Iraq, Shanidar 1 was a Neanderthal man who died somewhere around 40 to 50 years old, which for a Neanderthal is genuinely elderly. And his skeleton reads like a list of catastrophic injuries. His right arm had been amputated or atrophied below the elbow, likely decades before death. One leg showed signs of a serious fracture that had healed, but left him with a significant limp. He had bone growths in his ear canals consistent with severe hearing loss, possibly near total deafness on one side, and his face showed evidence of a traumatic injury that may have affected his vision. Now think about what that actually means for survival. A one-armed, partially deaf, limping Neanderthal man living in an Ice Age environment, surrounded by predators, dependent on hunting and physical labor for survival. He should not have made it, not for one winter, let alone for years. And yet the healing on his bones shows he lived for a long time after these injuries. Decades, in some estimates. Someone fed him. Someone protected him. Someone made the decision repeatedly every single day that keeping this man alive was worth the resources it cost the group. This isn't an isolated case either. Chapelle-aux-Saints, another famous Neanderthal skeleton, shows an individual with severe arthritis, missing teeth, and degenerative joint disease, so advanced he likely couldn't have chewed tough food or moved easily. He too survived for years in that condition. And here's where it gets even stranger. There's a Homo erectus skull from Dmanisi, Georgia, dating back roughly 1.77 million years, over 1 million years before modern humans even existed, belonging to an individual who had lost almost all their teeth years before death. The bone had completely remodeled around the empty sockets. No teeth means no ability to chew tough meat or hard plant material, which were the primary food sources available. That individual survived for years on food that had to be specially prepared. Pre-chewed, perhaps. Mashed. Softened somehow. By someone else. 1 million years ago. Let that sink in. Before language as we understand it. Before art. Before burial. Before almost everything we associate with being human. Something was already feeding its elderly. Now, here's where we need to address the skeptic, because this isn't a uniformly rosy picture, and pretending otherwise would be dishonest. Not every culture treated aging the same way, and not every elderly person got the Shanidar treatment. In environments where survival margins were razor thin, particularly in extreme Arctic conditions, anthropologists have documented practices where elderly individuals, in times of severe famine, would voluntarily remove themselves from the group or be left behind because the alternative was the whole group starving. This wasn't universal, it wasn't casual, and it was often framed within the culture's own value system as an act of sacrifice rather than abandonment. But it happened, and it's part of the honest picture. So the truth isn't ancient humans always revered their elders no matter what. The truth is more nuanced and, honestly, more human. The default, the overwhelming pattern across the archaeological and anthropological record was care. Investment. Resource allocation toward people who could no longer hunt, forage, or fight. But that care existed within real constraints. And in the most extreme environments, those constraints sometimes won. What's remarkable isn't that there are exceptions. It's that the default was care at all. Because evolutionarily, that shouldn't be the case. An individual who can no longer reproduce and can no longer contribute physical labor is, by the cold logic of natural selection, a drain on resources. So why would evolution favor a species that keeps these individuals alive? The answer is one of the most elegant ideas in evolutionary anthropology, the grandmother hypothesis. Here's the core idea. Human children take an enormous amount of time and energy to raise, far longer than almost any other species. A human mother, especially in a hunter-gatherer context, often can't gather enough food for herself, a nursing infant, and older children simultaneously. But what if there's another adult around, past reproductive age, with decades of accumulated ecological knowledge, who can forage, prepare food, and care for older children while the mother focuses on the infant? Studies of modern hunter-gatherer groups, including extensive research among the Hadza of Tanzania, show exactly this pattern. Grandmothers are often among the most productive foragers in the entire group. Their presence measurably increases the survival rate of their grandchildren. Their knowledge which plants are safe, which are medicine, which water sources don't dry up, where the predators den, what the weather patterns mean, gets transmitted directly generation to generation through decades of lived presence. An elderly person in a prehistoric group wasn't dead weight. They were, in the most literal sense, a survival resource. A walking, talking archive of accumulated information that the group could not get anywhere else. Lose the elders, and you don't just lose people. You lose the only copy of decades of hard-won knowledge about how to survive in that specific landscape. This is why the investment in Shanidar 1, in the Dmanisi individual, in countless other cases across the fossil record, makes evolutionary sense. It wasn't sentimentality, even if it felt like sentimentality to the people doing it. It was an investment with a return. Keep the elder alive, and the group keeps access to irreplaceable knowledge. So here's what this actually means, zoomed all the way out. The image of prehistoric life as a brutal, short, every man for himself scramble where the old and weak were simply left behind. That image is mostly wrong. It's a projection of modern anxieties about aging onto a past that, in many ways, handled this question better than we often do now. Old age in prehistory wasn't a malfunction. It wasn't an embarrassing biological accident that society had to awkwardly accommodate. It was, for a huge stretch of human existence, a role, a function, a position in the group that came with purpose, value, and, as the bones show us, active, sustained daily care. The man with one arm and partial deafness wasn't a burden someone reluctantly tolerated. He was someone whose presence, whose knowledge, whose simple continued existence was worth the cost of feeding him for years. Next time you think about what it means to get old, what it means to need help, to depend on other people, to no longer be the strongest or fastest person in the room, remember that this isn't a modern problem we're failing to solve. It's one of the oldest relationships our species has ever had. Someone, somewhere a million years ago, decided that keeping you around was worth it. That decision is still being made today. Every single day. By someone for someone. The thread never broke.